What I think RFK is doing, whether you like it or not, is RFK is jumping on what he has at the moment to get at least a little bit of something. I mean, you keep referring to it as like some bureaucratic departmental position in the HHS, but if he's the HHS secretary, he'll have a lot of power. Now, it's not presidential power, and we'll have to see how it plays out if they win, but it is a lot better than where Bernie is sitting, I would say.
Some power is better than no power. Bernie always said that he would support in 2016 and 2020 the ultimate Democratic nominee. RFK Jr. never gave an indication that, if I run out of money and I screw up my residency status in New York State, I'm therefore going to become a MAGA Republican. I mean,
but what about Bernie's ideas? Where's Medicare for all right now?
Well, I mean, Bernie says that Bernie was one of the few people who was still supporting Joe Biden as the entire party was turning on him, because he was saying that Biden's given me a seat at the table. We've done some legislation that Bernie liked. So if you ask Bernie himself, he says that he's gotten a lot from his.
And I would be willing.
Joe Biden. And in fact, it was more straightforward or above board than what RFK Jr. is saying, because at least Bernie Sanders tried to contest the Democratic nomination, failed, supported the nominee. RFK Jr. is doing this bizarre thing where he was at least purporting to run this independent campaign to challenge the two-party system, and now it's just becoming a cog in one of the major corporate parties that he was previously maligning as of like 3 weeks ago.
I mean, Bernie was saying he was going to start a revolution and all this stuff too.
Yeah, within the Democratic Party.
He's just he's just a cog in that. I would be willing to bet, I don't have data on this, but I would be willing to bet that a lot of RFK supporters were Bernie bros, and we're like twice bitten now, and they're ready to move out.
All right, Eric Blair has joined us, so if you have a point to make, go ahead.
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Good. And always, I just want to congratulate, or I want to thank Michael for taking on all comers, because that's one of the best things about you. But anyways, I have two questions then for your thesis, which is, do you believe that you called it a scam? Do you believe it was RFK's intention from the very beginning to eventually endorse Trump? A. And then B, I guess kind of a wrinkle on that. What do you think of the fact that there were reports that he was trying to make the same deal with the Harris campaign, but they didn't really take his call?
Well, I mean, we've been over this question of intentionality. Again, I cannot get inside RFK Jr.'s brain, nor would I want to, because I might get brain worms. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't tell you what his intention was at the beginning, because how could I opine on that without being inside his head, right? So all I know is based on his public statements, the impressions that he was giving to people, the basis on which he was collecting contributions and donations and supporters, and the idea that if you had been told a year ago or 6 months ago that the sum total or the end result of the RFK Jr. groundbreaking independent campaign and insurgent Democratic primary campaign would be that he would just become a cog in the MAGA machine and ass-kiss Donald Trump, I mean, please. I mean, that would not have been consistent with the impression portrayed. So I don't know what his intention was. I can't say. All I can look at is the end result and then use that to, in retrospect, assess what RFK Jr. was doing this entire time. He raised millions of dollars to build up a 50-state vote infrastructure, which can then, he went around to different states and sought the nominations of independent parties, like as far-flung as the Alaska Independence Party and other random parties around the country, certain state chapters of the Libertarian Party and the Reform Party. So he screwed all them over.
Well, hold on.
Your point's a fair point, but I think that I don't think he was actively directing that. I think he hired ballot access consultants that took the path to least resistance.
He's the candidate. He hired him.
Yeah, I understand.
Doesn't it make, well, wouldn't it be...
And Eric, just to clarify something, I'm not wedded to the term ruse. Chris and I had been discussing earlier. I'm open to a variety of different terms. Swindle maybe is a more apt one. We both agreed failure, joke, fiasco, something like that. All that works for me. Ruse, if it implies too much intentionality, I'm willing to opt for a different word.
Well, wouldn't it be enough to say that RFK gave it his best shot? He thought he had a chance of winning, or he thought he could have some influence running for president. Now, circumstances have changed, and he can see the writing on the wall, so he's trying to do the next best thing, which is to try to endorse whichever candidate he might think would give him some chance to have who would win and give him a chance to have access. And that's why I asked about, well, he did actually also try to talk to the Harris campaign as well. So, it's unfortunate that he would have to do this, or that he's in this position, but isn't it enough to say that he tried, he failed, and now he's trying to do the next best thing?
Do you see a lot of coverage of what RFK Jr. is doing, especially on the euphoric, jubilated right-wing media or alternative media, casting his campaign as a failure? It seems like they're elated. It seems like that they're calling this like this ultimate triumph of independence and taking on the deep state, when what they're really cheering functionally is that RFK Jr. might have given a marginal benefit to Donald Trump in his odds for winning the election, which I get. If you're a hardcore Trump supporter or partisan, I get why that might be what you're choosing to focus on.
And if he had endorsed Kamala, they would not be cheering him, and the Kamala people would. So
I'm not surprised that Kamala did not entertain discussions with him. But
and I do think, back to your point earlier about Pompeo, I do think, to whatever claim the Trump movement has had on populism, if he brings people like Pompeo back in, that's more neocon than even the Democrats are trying to be at that point.
Yeah, RFK Jr., I've read this, I'll pull it up again because it's amazing. RFK Jr. in May, in that big critique that he put out of Trump, said that Donald Trump, the message effectively was, Trump has learned nothing about who he staffed regarding who he staffed his administration with the first time. And he's now even talking about appointing Lindsey Graham Secretary of State. I didn't know that to be a legitimate rumor, but that's what RFK Jr. claimed. And he was citing that as evidence that people who think a second administration under Trump will be any different than the first are engaged in wishful thinking, so essentially delusional. So I would like to know, if we're all supposed to be so appreciative and respectful of this pragmatic decision, then how does any of this get reconciled? Nobody's even asking for it to get reconciled. The Ukraine stuff is even more galling and incredible. If he is going to be bringing in Mike Pompeo to run U.S. foreign policy, just like he did in the first administration, and that's supposed to, quote, end the Ukraine war, has it occurred to anybody that Donald Trump has provided virtually zero details about how he's going to end the Ukraine war? Because ending the Ukraine war is just a cliche that anybody can repeat. That's what the Ukrainians themselves even say. That's what Putin says. Nobody says, oh, we're in favor of the Ukraine war continuing. Nobody ever puts it that way.
Right. Has it ever
occurred to you that maybe he's concealing these details because his policy is actually not going to result in the cessation of the hostilities, but perhaps even an escalation of them, which is what many of the Republican hawks who he's looking inclined to empower again, that's what their agenda is. If RFK Jr. is giving legitimacy to Trump by saying anybody who agrees with me or thinks they agree with me, RFK, on the issue of the Ukraine war should therefore support Trump, then that's a scandal. That's another reason why I might be inclined to use the word ruse, because I think that comes close to what you might call some form of active deception.
Well, Kamala called Biden a racist, so.
Yeah, but that's true. I'm not defending Kamala, but if the idea is that RFK Jr. is just as cynical and opportunistic as Kamala Harris, okay, I'll accept that.
In fairness, unlike many endorsements, especially from losing candidates who are there to kiss the ring, I think both in his standalone press conference as well as his rally appearance, I think in both instances, he did say, as part of his endorsement, we have many disagreements, which is more than you get from a lot of, to use your term, ass-kissing politicians who are just kissing up.
And what was his alternative? To endorse Harris, with whom he has even more disagreements. So it's the lesser of two evils to him.
Well, and I don't think anyone here is celebrating RFK being in the race or out of the race. I think I agree with 90% of what you were saying, other than I felt ruse implied that he was doing this illegitimately from the start. And I think this is where he found himself, 5% support, and trying to see if he could get any value of having spent the last few months running for president. Could he get any of his agenda on the map?
Well, you asked like what was his alternative? I mean, one of the potential alternatives, which he chose not to opt for, is that he could have actually ran the independent campaign that he was claiming he was going to run. He's already on ballots. He might not even be able to withdraw from some ballots, like in Wisconsin, because
but you said earlier that he would, like, you know, in the Democratic primary, for example, when someone drops out, they say hey, I'm always going to support the Democratic candidate, right? And so like they're doing the thing that they've always said. He said that he was never going to be a spoiler from the start. So when he sees himself being a spoiler, like, why would he continue to run? Like, because that is a promise that he made from the very beginning. So again, he's holding up that one promise that he did make. You can't have it one way and then not the other way.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's some ambiguity around what it means to be a spoiler. Does that just mean he loses the election and therefore his ultimate like utility in the race was just to be a quote spoiler for one or the other candidates? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess that if that's what you mean by spoiler, I think that there's also, I mean, one of the arguments that was used for his campaign was that in setting up all this infrastructure for a viable national third party candidate, on a level not seen since Ross Perot in 1992, then there would be some, future infrastructure that would be in place to perhaps continue to challenge the third party system. So I think spoiler, I mean, if now he's even validating this idea that third party candidates, if they don't win, are just spoilers, then he's even further denigrating the very concept of a third party candidate, because then they're always just quote spoilers. I mean, was Ralph Nader? I mean, so do we now agree that Ralph Nader was just a quote spoiler for George W. Bush? If so, then you just validate every Democratic grievance against Ralph Nader that they've been nursing for 24 years. I even just saw the Democratic convention this week that there's still like posters in the big auditorium that they had set up castigating Ralph Nader.
The path for third parties, though, I think has mainly been, maybe with rare exception, to get a single or maybe two agenda items absorbed into the larger party.
I think that's what we saw with the libertarians and Trump at the libertarian rally, but to go back on the infrastructure piece, right? Again, if Kamala wins, at least the logic, that people are saying that Kennedy's thinking, again, not being able to get in his head, that's 8 years. He's going to be 78, 79, the same age as what Trump. Like there's no saying how much political power he's going to have then. And his numbers have fallen below 5%, so he's not going to get federal matching funds. So I think he saw that idea of this viable third-party option also slipping away from him too, right? So like he just keep going lower and lower as, hey, I have a path to victory. I have zero path to victories, but I have I can set up a viable third party. Hey, it doesn't even look like I can do that now. What's the next thing that I can hold on to and consolidate?
Another reason why you might reasonably call the campaign a ruse is because it is true that from the very beginning, his campaign was largely funded or received much of its funding from Republican billionaires or Republican megadonors like Timothy Mellon, the heir of the Mellon family fortune, like a banking magnate, funneled like a massive amount of money into both RFK Jr. and Trump simultaneously. And you had other donors whose names escape me right now who did the same thing. So if they calculated in funding RFK Jr. that they could do it as like a proxy of helping Trump, right? By, in the first instance, creating a nuisance within the Democratic Party for, at the time, Joe Biden in the primary, or kind of attracting disaffected, maybe Republican-leaning voters who would then ultimately be urged to vote for Trump, then that, first of all, their calculation worked, if that's what it was. So congratulations to those scheming donors. But if that kind of didn't work, then that really was sort of a ruse.
But that would be true whether he dropped out or not, right? Because the ruse kind of didn't work because Kamala entered the race, and that support left Kennedy to return to Kamala.
And also, it requires you to get as much in their head as it would for Kennedy.
I don't understand how Kamala replacing Biden fundamentally changed any of
it changed
Kennedy Jr.'s like substantive critiques of the Democratic Party or of the political system, right? It was just replacing one figurehead with another.
It changed the support. It to the extent that of the 15%, 10% was Democrats who thought Biden was unfit and couldn't support Biden on a ticket and were looking for somebody Democrat-ish. They took RFK. And then when somebody who was not Biden and is younger and is to some more fit for office than Biden, then that support went from RFK right back to the Democrat Party. And then the other thing in terms of his billionaire backers, I mean, the thing I would say is that you could say his campaign got increasingly less credible each day. And one of those days was when he selected the person he selected for vice president. At that point, I think anybody who was hoping that this was a serious candidacy knew that it was I don't know. You know what it made me start to wonder was what is the thing that brings the Jill Steins and the RFKs and the professor whose name I'm forgetting who's running Cornell West. You know, is there that much money in running for president in a 3% campaign? And who's publishing that book?
Well, I mean, if RFK Jr.'s objective was just to raise his national profile, obviously he could sell a lot of books. He already has sold a lot of books with his Fauci stuff or what have you. And to angle for some sort of personal political power or stature, like within, even if it's as relatively lackluster as within the Department of Health and Human Services or on some FDA panel, then I think his calculation worked. But the whole idea, the whole thing that elevated him to the point where he could leverage that kind of power was supposedly he was galvanizing some kind of mass movement. And yet, as you pointed out, I mean, he picked up a random Google heiress as his vice presidential pick. And so, and that was probably the low point of the campaign, frankly, because what has she done for all these months when she's been ostensibly the vice presidential nominee for a viable third party candidacy, other than like do a dopey podcast and also write checks?
Well, I think
so
that's
a little bit more, kind of more evidence that
a lot of money.
You don't want to use the word ruse, maybe kind of a sham or a.
No, but I think it's fair to say, you know, if he was just a guy interested in grifting money, couldn't he have done the same thing in 2020? I do think there's something to be said for the world that COVID created and the things that the government did in the wake of that probably pushed him to run in the election more so than prior to that.
Yeah, I don't think he's solely. I mean, I think it would be unfair to surmise that he's solely interested in making money. There are other ways as a Kennedy dynast that I'm sure he could have made money as a lawyer or whatnot, and he already had made a lot of money. I'm just saying, you know, increasing his own political prominence, which inevitably also then leads to opportunities to make additional money. So it's not just like about a pure political grift. I mean, who would go through the arduousness of
the media
running a presidential campaign, in order to solely to make money? So I don't think that's it.
Well, didn't he
but like personal empowerment, personal self-aggrandizement, putting out this, I think, false mythology around the Kennedy family, because that's also contributing to his self-aggrandizement. I mean, the fanciful notions that people continue to have about John F. Kennedy never cease to astound me. We don't have to get down that rabbit hole.
Well, or any of these dynasties. Like, hey, my dad did something, so you should elect me. It's the craziest argument.
My uncle and dad got shot. Vote for me.
I'm tired of Bushes. I'm tired of Clintons. I'm tired of Obamas. I'm tired of Trumps, honestly.
Get ready for Barron. Get ready for Barron.
Yeah, I mean, the Trumps could easily have a dynasty if they wanted. And yeah, I mean, Barron could be our overlord in like 10 or 20 years. So,
but
I would rather vote for Barron than Trump Jr. or Eric Trump, but okay.
Didn't he get a concession out of Trump, which is that about the JFK records?
Yeah, but that's a promise Trump made in 2016 as well.
Trump said the same thing. Trump invoked his presidential authority to continue to conceal certain of the outstanding JFK assassination records, even though it was congressionally mandated that they be released within 25 years. So I think, you know, in the wake of that Oliver Stone JFK movie, which I think, unfortunately, has contributed to much of this ridiculous mythos. But nonetheless, it did prompt Congress to pass a law that require the government to release, like in good faith, I forget the exact language, release all the outstanding JFK assassination records within 25 years. And that 25, this was like in 1991 or 2, I think. And then Trump happened to be in office at that 25-year mark, and he just kept delaying the release of the records. So why didn't he do it then?
And as a give to Pompeo, I think it was Pompeo who was lobbying him to keep it secret. And I think there was recently some reporting that I want to say it's Judge
Napolitano.
Yeah, who was saying that he had called, or Trump had called him, because apparently he called him from time to time to advise on some things. And in this case, it was in January, and he was talking to him about some of the people he was going to pardon. And the judge said that he had a bone to pick with Trump because Trump didn't release the records. And Trump allegedly said, if you saw what they showed me, you wouldn't have released them either.
Yeah, that's kind of, hearsay. Maybe he said something like it.
So I guess I would say if that's true, there's nothing to say that he's going to release it over the next 4 years either.
Well, when one of your supposed concessions is that you're going to set up some sort of independent commission to maybe eventually decide to do something in a couple of years, to call that a concession is probably to overstate the significance. It seemed like it was more about Trump wanting there to be some independent investigation in his own recent assassination attempt, because it was about presidential assassinations and throw RFK and the Kennedy mythology obsessives a bone about releasing some of the ancient documents.
And to your point, I think it's an acknowledgement of how small RFK's bargaining chip is. I mean, Kamala won't take his call. Trump is maybe going to have him head up something on child health, maybe, like if Congress wants to do it, or I don't know. Seems pretty thin. It's a pretty small bargaining chip.
People forget RFK Jr. went to Trump Tower in, I think it was January of 2017, while Trump was president-elect. And they had some sort of meeting, and I forget how this was publicized or announced, but there was some indication that Trump was going to bring RFK Jr. in to run some sort of like vaccine inquiry or something to do with children's health or whatever. And then it just never happened. So if the concession apparently is Trump offering RFK Jr. the same thing that he offered him in January of 2017 before RFK Jr. ever ran his alleged presidential campaign, I mean, that's a hilarious concession.
Well, and especially like you're saying, a previously broken promise, both on the JFK files and on the healthcare front.
Yeah. What else? I mean, there's other stuff. I mean, people keep accusing me of being overly emotional or like personally slighted or aggrieved about this. I'm not. I mean, I do find the mythology around the Kennedy family annoying and how it's misappropriated and used to, I mean, here's what does genuinely bother me about it, okay? And this was one of my criticisms of the RFK Jr. quote-unquote campaign from the very beginning, which is that he's like putting out a phony critique of the deep state, therefore kind of tricking people or misleading people into buying into his version of a, quote, deep state critique, and therefore squandering whatever genuine concern there is out there for scrutiny and oversight and transparency related to the intelligence services or the federal law enforcement agencies or U.S. foreign policy. So by making it out to be this like martyr myth that, of course, involves his own family, and then you're sort of misdirecting whatever legitimate energy might be directed toward doing legitimate oversight. And now he just has, completed that little facade by saying, oh yeah, now the big champion of the deep state, of countering the deep state rather, is him in concert with Donald Trump. What? I mean, what indication is there that Donald Trump wants to disempower or impose oversight on the intelligence services or the federal law enforcement agencies or on the military industrial sector? Just go look at what RFK Jr. himself said about Donald Trump as of a month ago. He said that he would do the exact opposite. So now you're kind of undercutting or misdirecting or disempowering whatever semblance of actual momentum or energy might have been built up around this movement to curb some of the excesses of the deep state. Trump, to whatever degree that he actually does want to curtail the deep state, and I don't even use that term anymore because it's been so misapplied. I just say, permanent bureaucracy, national security state, whatever. Trump just wants it to be more like politically responsive to him and his appointees to preserve, to fulfill their fundamental task of advancing and preserving and expanding American hegemony. I mean, Trump endorsed renewal of FISA warrantless surveillance in April on the grounds that he and Mike Johnson decided that he wants to be the one presiding over the warrantless surveillance. So it's just about Trump being at the head of this quote-unquote deep state architecture more than any kind of principled criticism of the deep state itself. And RFK Jr. is now giving license to Trump, giving whatever credibility people might have perceived him to have in terms of counteracting the deep state, and just handing it over to Trump, which seems like it's been that's like a total abdication of
to your point. I think Trump gets an abundance of credit for doing something that the Harris campaign has been doing, which is the vibes. Meaning that if you look at Trump's actions, policies, and appointees, it's entirely supportive of the military-industrial complex. Now, is he willing to stand on a stage with Putin and say, I believe Putin more than I believe the CIA about what's happening in the world? Yes. So does the deep state like that? No. But still, his power structure is still supportive. But
not even about what's happening in the world. Trump said that about what was happening with what had happened with respect to his own campaign.
Yeah.
Meaning he was trying to downplay quote unquote Russian interference in the 2016 election, and so that he had talked to Putin, and Putin said that they didn't interfere. So that just related to Trump's own self-interest and his political standing, right? It wasn't even about what was going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is that because he used that rhetoric and was willing to say things against his own intelligence community, people overassign him credit that somehow he's fighting the deep state or fighting the military-industrial complex.